Okay, page 14, the middle of the page, I left off. The last thing that Cypress said was, "I'd like to see him, Joseph, when he's awake in his time, if you don't mind," Cypress said dryly. 1615, the year. Just as Oversoul 7 and Cypress arrived at Joseph's, there was a tremendous pounding at his door. Joseph glanced at her, moaned, bounded out of bed, ran his fingers through his bushy hair, and almost sobbed. He'd never felt so cornered in his life. "Coming, yes, yes," he shouted. He hoped that he sounded enraged, impatient, anything but scared. He grabbed a paintbrush, dipped it into a jar of varnish, held it between his teeth, and threw open the door. "I'm working, can't you see? I'm busy. But come in if you must." Elgren Hostenstoff reminded himself that his wife was watching from the first-floor landing, so he strode through the door briskly. It was, after all, his house and his extra room. The place was a mess of rumpled clothing, tossed bedding, paint jars, and canvases in various stages of completion. "Ah, were you just sleeping or painting? My wife swears that you are still in bed." "What does it look like? Do you think I sleep with my paintbrush in my mouth?" Joseph pushed the brush toward Hostenstoff's nose so that the smell of fresh varnish made the older man's eyes water and his nose run. "You distrust me," Joseph said, now that he had the advantage. "You have always distrusted me. How can I work under such conditions?" Hostenstoff stepped back. "All right, but my wife tells me that you eat more than 10 farmhands put together, and I won't be taken advantage of. We've yet to see a glimmer of our painting. You've been here 6 weeks now, eating our good food, using our nice room. The painter, my cousin, did his portrait in 2 weeks and was gone. And the painting probably won't last much longer than that," Joseph retorted, getting into it. "A good artist needs time." He pointed dramatically to the draped easel. "Your portrait is covered. I've told you. It makes me nervous to show a painting before it's done. And it took me a good 2 weeks to get started as it is. Your wife put me in such a mood that I couldn't think, much less paint." "Shush!" Hostenstoff's light blue eyes lowered. Some of the belligerence drained from his face. He'd been shaking his finger at Joseph. Now he fussed with his shirt instead, and looked almost pleadingly up into Joseph's stormy face. "My wife is impatient to see the painting. Women, they cannot wait." "Ah, don't I know it?" Joseph said, as if they shared a dark, mysterious secret. "But very soon now I will unveil the portrait." He threw his arms out dramatically and smiled grandly. "You will see your family immortalized through the ages, the Hostenstoff family. The portrait will go down through the generations from father to son." "He's a lazy clout. You should put him out in the snow like the cur he is," yelled Ivana Hostenstoff from the stairs. Flinching, her husband closed the door. "Ah, very well," shouted Joseph. I'll burn your painting. I'll burn my painting rather than give it to the likes of that one. None of you deserves fine art. You're worse than shopkeepers." He rummaged through the room, picking up his belongings, and he stopped in front of the covered easel. "You will never be completed. Never," he moaned. "Some silly woman prevents it. Ah, well, If they resent the few morsels of food I eat, the use of this tiny room in exchange for a masterpiece. Hossenstoff was an unimaginative man, at least generally speaking. It didn't occur to him, at this point, that anyone could fake such anguish. Now, he said hurriedly. I'll talk things over with my wife. I'll see what she says. He backed out of the room and closed the door. Cypress and Oversoul 7 were now 2 flakes of snow on the windowsill. Embarrassed, 7 said, Joseph's very excitable. Just then, Joseph threw the cover off the easel, displaying not a half-completed painting at all, but the empty canvas beneath. And quite deceitful, Cypress said. No, I'm sure he doesn't mean to be, 7 answered uneasily, because obviously it wasn't going to be one of Joseph's better days. Joseph stared at the canvas hatefully. Blank, all blank, he muttered. Bah! Completely disgusted, he planked down on the bed. Hossenstoff wouldn't be back. He knew, but his wife would, with her eldest son. They'd boot him out. There'd be no more hedging or excuses. He'd be back on the plains, on his skis, with his supplies on his back, cold and hungry, until he could find another farmer willing to give him bed and board for a painting. And worse, he just couldn't make himself paint anything at all. This time his torment was quite real. He threw the sticky varnished covered brush across the room and wondered what to do. Your dream, Oversoul 7 said. Cypress, can't I remind him? The painting I gave him in the dream. He's forgotten all about it. No, you cannot, she said. No prompting in this part of the exam. You know that. 25 demerits in case you have any ideas. Examination or not, I mean, he is in trouble, 7 said. Oh, somebody help me, Joseph moaned. How many demerits, 7 asked. 25, and you have several already, she reminded him. And you still won't tell me what happens if I fail, or pass? She said gently, that's part of the examination, too. You have to find that out. Oh, dear God, I'll never lie or cheat again if you'll just help me now, Joseph prayed. Your dream, 7 transmitted the words directly into Joseph's mind. The painting in the dream. The instant transformation in Joseph was extraordinary. Suddenly he shouted, leapt up from the bed, threw his arms around himself, and danced about the room. Oversoul 7 almost burst with excitement himself. Cypress made a determined effort not to show any expression at all, to guard her thoughts. Get to it, 7 signaled Joseph. Now, standing before the easel, Joseph grinned from ear to ear. In his mind's eye, as clearly as he'd ever seen anything in his entire life, he saw an oil painting of the Hossenstoff farm in the summer, the fields rich, the sturdy house surrounded by tulips. The greens glowed with vitality. It was in the middle of the season with only sneaky touches of brown hinting at the overripeness that would be its own undoing. Even the grays beneath the yellows and the whites of the house suggested that the farmhouse, while secure, would not triumph over time. Yet somehow the overall effect was still one of vitality, as if the entire scene would endure, even while it was so physically vulnerable. He'd never seen a painting so clearly in his mind before. The canvas was coated, all ready to work, and as the thoughts went flying through his mind, Joseph's hands were busily mixing the colors for his palette. Combining the dry pigments with linseed oil. He felt swift, sure, godlike, with this sudden, unexpected rush of inspiration. Singing, almost shouting, he began to paint. Partaking of Joseph's experience, Oversoul 7 forgot everything else. Once, when Joseph picked the wrong color, 7 called, "No, no, you'll spoil it. You want earth tones there." Another time he cried, "No, you dunce. This is only the underpainting." Cypress waited, never interfering. Only once she spoke. "This part of the examination is only supposed to involve a brief viewing," she said, making her tone as neutral as possible. Yes, I'll be with you shortly," 7 muttered. Then, No, transparent color there, not opaque," he called to Joseph. 5 hours of earth time passed. There was a knock at the door. "Go away, I'm working," Joseph shouted. The door flew open. Mrs. Hossenthal and her eldest son, Jonathan, came pounding into the room. "Ah, now maybe we'll get a look at the painting that isn't there. I want to see underneath the cover." "I don't believe a word you say," Mrs. Hossenthal shouted. Then she and her son both stopped, speechless. "Now you see. Go leave me alone," Joseph muttered. Nothing mattered but the painting. "It's of my lovely house," Mrs. Hossenthal said. "It's beautiful." "An inspiration," Jonathan said. "Man to man, let me apologize." "Apologize then, and let me work. Can't you see I'm busy? I'm not finished. I'm barely begun." "And you started the portrait too?" Jonathan asked hastily. Yes. Joseph cried automatically. "Liar," 7 shouted to Joseph's mind. "You promised not to lie or cheat again." A sudden pang of guilt just made Joseph angry. He wanted to get on with his painting. "You'll have your portrait in good time," he said. "Can't a man have peace to work?" Mrs. Hossenthal and her son moved toward the door almost deferentially. Joseph yelled after them triumphantly. "The house was meant as a bonus to repay you for your great kindness." "Oh, Joseph," 7 sighed. Cypress said, "You realize what you've done, of course. Become so involved in Joseph's difficulties that you've forgotten everything, even the examination." 7 came back to himself with dismay. "But I have to wait till he finishes the underpainting now that I've started," he said. "Then Joseph can do the rest himself well enough." "I'll speak to you when you're finished then," Cypress said. For a moment 7 wondered why he couldn't pick up more of Cypress's thoughts. But already she was gone. 7 stayed there while Joseph continued to paint, his brush like a perfect extension of the picture in his mind. Chapter 3, Maha's Trek, The Earthization of Oversoul 7, Part 2 of the examination. I'm going to take a break.